All right, so last time round, we already saw that I added this data in. I'm going to go back through it and show you how exactly I added in this data. So in my data sets, I've got a couple of different data sets that I'm going to be working with. I do have some census data from the 1860s. This is pulled from the Census of Population for Mississippi and also from the Census of Agriculture, the Economic Census. This one was pulled from a university data set, which I will link in the website. So, but with this, there's a couple different things that you can do. So you can add in data in three major ways. But one of the things you always have to keep in mind is what kind of data are you actually using. So the data set that I had pulled in before was this data set here, this MS 1860 Table 2 population data. And you can see here that there's a whole variety of files that are all attached to this. Generally speaking, in GIS land or GIS data, we refer to them as vector files or more commonly shape files. Now the shape file itself is actually just this SHP file, but the SHP file is actually a collection of files that all have to be used together. And so that includes this .shp file, this .spx, this prj, dbf, all of these go together and actually in the backend compile to use or to be able to use this particular data set. So for example, if I copied only these and I left this, maybe I left those two out. So I'm going to leave out this dbf and this cpg. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put it into a new folder and say that this is going to be a slightly different data set. I just called it test. I'm going to put it in here. So what I can do is I can take this .shp file and try and drag and drop it in. It may pull that in, but one of the things you're going to have to double check is make sure that it actually has the things that you want. So I just pulled up the attribute table here, and you'll see that this attribute table in this case is empty. Now, if I go to that original data set I had here, now you might be thinking, well, that's fine. It doesn't have any of the data and it shows up just fine. Well, if I actually go to this other one that I looked up before, I right click on it, I go to open an attribute table. This is where all the other attributes are, all the things that are not directly where it's located. And you'll notice that there's this whole table here, right? So it has a whole bunch of information in terms of the county is, what the population is, all of those sorts of things from 1860. But when in that new one that I had pulled up, it no longer existed. Now this is because that .dbf file, which is that table file, that one is no longer in this. So I no longer have this data. So you always just have to be really careful if you are looking, if you're moving data and things like that, that you don't accidentally move certain things outside of that. So now with that data though, you saw one of the ways that you can add data, and that is to drag and drop it into that folder. So I can do this again with a different type of variable. This type of variable, or not this type of, it's not a variable. This type of data set is a GeoJSON. Same type of file. This one is the 1860 census. And so I can drag and drop it in. It's going to pull it up. Now, this one is nice because it does not have all of the different files that you have to keep together. I can right click on it. I can open it up, make sure that it actually has some data attached to it. It does. That's fantastic. That's exactly what we want. Now, one of the things to note with GeoJSONs is that they don't always work in all different softwares, but they are fairly useful and fairly workable in the QGIS software. So they're perfectly fine to use in QGIS. So drag and drop is going to be the thing that you want to do. If you're going to drag and drop a shape file, you want to actually drag and drop the .shp file. If you try and drag and drop a shape file from one of its other ones, the most common one that I see people try to do is because they see this .shp and it's actually, if you look over, it's a .xml. If I pull this one over, you're going to get this red button up here. And this one says, nope, I can't add this data type. So sometimes it won't do that. Now, there's another way that you can do it. That's this button up here. It says open data source. You can click on it. It's going to open up this nice little dialog box here, and it has a whole bunch of other things that you can add as well, right? So you can add in virtual layers here. We're not going to talk about that right now, but I can go back and I can say, oh, I want to open a vector layer. So that's that .shp, that .geojson that we had just saw. And so in this case, I've already added in 2 of those layers. So I'm actually going to go over and I'm going to add this GeoJSON over here for the battles. And so these are all the Civil War battles. And so I'm going to do that here. Now, you can help it along. If it doesn't see everything, you can change some options on this. In this case, I know that the defaults are going to be okay. And so I'm going to say, yep, that's fine. And I'm going to add that. You'll notice that it comes up on top. And that's exactly what we want. So that's an option as well. Now there's another way, and this is the third way that you can get this information in. And this is if you go to layer at the top, you'll notice that same button right there. And it says this data source manager there. That data source manager is the exact same one. And you'll notice that in my case, it has the hotkeys Control L. So I can also do it that way. So if I was here and I typed, you won't be able to see it, Control L, it's going to pop up with the exact same thing. Now, QGIS is quirky in that it remembers what you've already done, and so just keep in mind. So in this case, I'm going to open these 3 buttons. This is how I'm going to navigate over into my actual files, and I'm going to say, okay, in this case, what I actually want to do is I don't want a vector file. What I actually want is we have information from the CWRGM, the Civil War and Reconstruction Governors of Mississippi letters. And so those tags and all those subject tags for those letters are in a .csv. A .csv, comma separated value, is a delimited text file, and it's delimited by commas. You can also do this with tab delimited files as well. I typically don't use tab delimited files. I very much am towards using .csvs, but if you do have tab delimited files, that is perfectly fine. Now, if you do have an Excel file, right, so a .xlsx, then you're going to want to export one of those sheets to a .csv. So in this case, I've got the tags, I've got them as a CSV, and I'm going to say, yep, that's exactly what I want. Now, in this case, this is going to load this as if it were a shapefile. So it's going to automatically put this as it's going to try and find where coordinates are. So if you don't have coordinates, then you're going to want to make sure that you just add in your data another way, or you do a join or things of that nature. And so you'll notice here that it pops up with this information. I'm going to pull it over. And so you can just make sure that it's actually done it correctly. If something isn't and you need to change it, you have different options in that case, right? So this just lets you have options about how it's going to load in. And so I'm also going to make sure that, yes, it is going to show up as point file. It's going to be a subject longitude and a subject latitude. Those are the fields in the table. So these are the columns in the table that exist that tell me where exactly I have some sort of information that is related to geographic location. It's not the only one, but for the purpose of this, it is probably the easiest to use and is something that would be rather useful. Now, from there, it also has the CRS. So particularly if you're dealing with old data, you might have longitudes and latitudes that are in a different coordinate system. In this case, this data was georeferenced to the WGS 1984, so it's perfectly fine to use this. And so once I have all of those different things, I can just hit add, and then it's going to pop up with all of the subject tags, and it just is going to take a little bit longer because there's a lot of them. And so then you can see, and they're all going to pop up. Now, as I mentioned before with this, when there are multiple data sets, if one is below the others, it no longer is visible to the things that are covering it. So those are 3 different ways that you can add data. As I said, you can also add virtual layers. We will talk about that at a later date. We don't really need to deal with that right now. So feel free to go play around with your data and take a look at it and see what you can do with it. Thank you so much, and we'll be back to talk symbology.